Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the 9th YouTube session of the 10th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. And yes, it's the 10th anniversary of Read for Pixels. My name is Anusha Kanasivam. I'm your moderator for this session. Today's YouTube session is also our 20th Read for Pixels live stream author panel since we started hosting panels in 2018. The Pixel Project created these multi-author panel sessions to be an accessible resource for writers interested in writing about female characters and approaching themes such as misogyny, sexism, gender, and violence against women with depth, empathy, and accuracy. And we have a really interesting topic and timely topic for today's panel. It's The Kids Are All Right, a 10-year retrospective on sexism, misogyny, and violence against women in young adult books. Here to participate in this discussion are three award-winning and best-selling young adult authors. And here they are. Hello, everyone. So I'm just going to give you all a very quick introduction. So next to me, we have Sebastien de Castell. He's acclaimed swashbuckling fantasy series, The Great Coats, was shortlisted for both the Goodreads Choice Award for Best Fantasy and the Gemo Morningstar Award. And his YA fantasy series, Spellslinger, is published in more than a dozen languages. And we have Alison Goodman, who is a Melbourne-based author of fantasy and historical fiction. She is the author of 7 novels, including the award-winning Lady Helen trilogy and Eon and Iona, a New York Times bestselling YA fantasy duology published in 20 countries. Alison recently completed her PhD focusing on historical research and the Regency era. And then, last but not least, we have PC Cast. PC is a #1 New York Times and #1 USA Today bestselling author who is a member of the Oklahoma Writers Hall of Fame. Her novels have been awarded the prestigious Oklahoma Book Award, YLSA, Quick Pick for Reluctant Readers, Romantic Times Reviewers Choice Award, Booksellers Best, and many, many, many more. Now, aside from joining today's panel, Alison, PC, and Sebastien have all very kindly donated some super exclusive goodies to the stash of author swag we have set up for donors at the Read for Pixels 10th Anniversary Rally Up fundraising page. So here we go. Alison is offering 2 Ill-Mannered Ladies bundles featuring one signed and personalized US first edition paperback of the Benevolent Society of Ill-Mannered Ladies. There it is. I love that cover. And one signed bookmark. Yes, so there are 2 of these available, and the bundles are available to donors worldwide. PC is kindly offering one hardcover set of all 4 books of her latest blockbuster series, Tales of a New World, which this comprises Moon Chosen, Sun Warrior, Wind Rider, and Earth Called, and these are all signed and personalized hardcovers, and some bonus books, hardback signed personalized copies of the House of Night spin-off. These are Loved, Lost, Forgotten, and Found. So that's 8 books altogether in one bundle. So finally, Sebastien is offering 2 gorgeous goodie bundles for donors in the US and Canada. The first one is the Argosy bundle, which comprises a set of the complete Argosy series, hardcover, signed, and personalized. There they are. So nice. It's The Way of the Argosy, The Fall of the Argosy, The Fates of the Argosy, plus one handwritten note from Farius Parfax, the lead character of the Argosy books, one exclusive set of Argosy cards, so cool, and one 8GB USB Spellslinger key. Okay, then the second bundle. There it is. The second bundle is the Malevolent 7 bundle, which comprises a signed and personalized hardcover of the Malevolent 7, and one set of 12 Wondrous cards. So awesome. And one special bookmark. All right. So we've raised $5,200 so far towards our $10,000 goal. That's 52%. So please do give generously before the fundraiser ends in October. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. So the link has gone up in the chat box, where the link to where you can go and get this stuff, but I'll tell you more about it later towards the end of the session. Meanwhile, you, the audience, will also be able to ask the panel questions live. Just make sure you're logged on to your YouTube account so that you can type your questions in the chat box, and Regina, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me, and I'll read them out to Alison, PC, and Sebastien to answer. Right, so onto the panel. So I'm going to give a little introduction before we start the questions. So The term young adult, despite being popularly regarded as a 21st century invention, was first coined in the 1960s, actually, though the first English language novels written specifically for teenagers came out in the 40s, when teenagers were first recognized as their own social demographic. However, it's still a relatively young genre when compared to, say, fantasy. Additionally, some people insist that young adult is not a genre at all, but a commercial category used by publishers to promote books aimed at teens and increasingly female readers. Some would argue that YA is both an age based classification of books as well as a genre in itself, albeit one that frequently crosses over with other genres because it has certain features that characterize it, including teen protagonists and Bildungsroman as a common theme. Modern YA doesn't shy away from tackling the deepest and darkest issues that teens and young people face, from growing up in marginalized communities to navigating sexism, misogyny, and violence against women. With regards to the latter, YA has also come under criticism for depicting and popularizing harmful tropes such as depicting stalking, gaslighting, toxic masculine behavior, and forms of intimate partner violence as romantic. If nothing else, this has helped galvanize plenty of discussion about these issues in homes and in classrooms. So, in honor of the 10th anniversary of Read for Pixels, today's panel will be discussing how YA has progressed and changed over the past decade with regards to sexism, misogyny, and VAW in the genre stories and books, as well as talk about tips and suggestions for YA authors, publishers, and readers who wish to help with efforts to end violence against women. All right, so let's get the discussion started. Now, Alison and PC, you started your careers writing very popular and well-received book series that are considered or categorized as YA fantasy before expanding into writing adult fantasy and historical mysteries, while Sebastien, you started writing YA series after your first adult fantasy series was published. So my first question is for Alison and PC. Why did you start writing out YA, or why do you think your breakthrough book that kickstarted your career as a published author turned out to be a YA book? Let's go with Alison first.
Go ahead. Okay. Well, I grew up reading those 1960s and 70s YA books, which sort of coined that genre, that marketing, whatever you see it as. So I grew up feeling that there should be books for me as a young person. And when I started to develop into a writer, I went the road of studying professional writing in university, and I was trained to be a literary short story writer for adults. And when I graduated, I had an opportunity, and I say this to all people who are writing and wish to become writers, that you grab those opportunities when they come along, whatever strange kind of formation they come in. And this opportunity was to read a short story at a conference as a local author. And so I read a short story that I'd written as part of my course. And lo and behold, in the audience was a scout for a YA anthology of science fiction. And she came up to me afterwards and said, I really liked your story because there was elements of magical realism in that story. And she said, would you like to write a short story, science fiction short story for this YA anthology? Now, I'd never written science fiction, although having been a Star Trek person from very long ago, and Star Wars, I was at Star Wars when it opened the first time. I thought, well, I know science fiction, and although I hadn't written for young adults, I thought, well, yes, I will give this a go. This was my opportunity to have a go at this kind of area. So I wrote a story called One Last Zoom at the Buzz Bar, which got published in the anthology. And the publisher liked the story so much that they said, would you like to write a novel of this character? And I said, absolutely. Again, I was offered the opportunity. I thought, yes, I hadn't planned to go into writing for young adults, but I liked it. And I felt quite comfortable there because, my mental age at the time was probably around 18. And hasn't changed much. So I wrote my first novel, Singing the Dog Star Blues, which is a science fiction comedy thriller, which was eventually published after some heartache and the usual kind of rocky road to publication. So that was my way into young adult. I hadn't expected to go into that area. But when retrospectively, hindsight is fabulous. I had been training for it in the sense that I had been reading enormous amounts of YA as a teenager, and sort of, I suppose, absorbing that kind of literature. So that is how I found my way into young adult, and was writing very happily there, and have been, and probably still do.
PC?
Well, I didn't start writing YA. I started writing adult, paranormal romance, and fantasy. And I had, but A House of Night is the first YA series that I wrote, and that was my breakout series. It was my 18th book published that debuted on the Times list. That was the third book in the House of Night series. So I was writing adult, and I was about 45 years old. It was 2005, and I was at a Romantic Times convention with my agent. We were having a very drunk dinner, and she looked at me and said, I have an idea for your next series. And I was like, okay. And she said, Vampire Finishing School. And I was teaching high school and had been teaching high school for many years. I'm from a family of high school teachers. And so I went, yeah, YA. And she went, what's YA? And I said, young adult. I said, it's young adult. And she said, no. I'm talking college co-eds, like a sucking class, a fighting class, a bonding class. And I was like, yeah, I can do that. But I told her, I am watching in my students the YA genre explode. And I said, I've been reading, I've read everything from the time I was really, really young. But I said, I also read what they're reading. And I said, I would like to be part of the YA explosion. I said, it's really doing valuable things. Kids are, since, Harry Potter really springboarded a bunch of kids to want more and more as they got older and older. And so she was very meh about it. And she said, all right. She said, write the first 3 chapters and send it to me, and I'll see if I can find any interest in it. So I was like, okay. So I did that, and there was interest in it, but not like most people would think there would have been interest in House of Night, because of how, I have more than 25 million books in print now, thanks largely to the House of Night. But no, there was a very small bidding war between Macmillan and Berkeley, and I'm talking tiny. Okay, we're not talking, when you say it went to auction, guys, don't quit your day job on that. I was still teaching, and as we said, I said yes to Macmillan, St. Martin's, and that's how I started in YA. So I still do both. I do YA mostly with my daughter, and then adult I do solo.
Yeah, great. So Sebastien, why did you decide to write a YA series after you started your career writing adult fantasy?
Well, I sort of tripped into it a little bit, in that I had originally Spellslinger had been meant to be basically kind of an adult fantasy series. The stranger in the western sort of desert who comes out of the desert into town and causes trouble. And then for some reason there was a fairly big publisher of children and young adult fiction who had expressed interest and asked whether I could do a set of 4 YA prequels to that sort of to that context, to that new series. And so I said, sure, well, I'll write an outline and a couple of sample chapters, as with PC, except that unlike with PC, they then said, actually, could you give us a couple more sample chapters? And I was like, okay. And then, well, could you give us a couple more sample chapters? And then by the time I'd written like most of the first book, I think they said, nah, we don't think we want it. But then oddly, all of a sudden, I got the world's, what I guess is the second now tiniest bidding war between a couple of publishers. And then it ended up being bought as an 8-book series, which was a pretty big number of books to get bought. And now, I guess now there's been 9 books when you count the 6 Spellslinger and the 3 Argosy books. So, so I kind of tripped into it, and once I kind of overcame the challenge, like the fundamental challenge, I think, of writing YA, which is trying to not write the events as if it's retrospectively, as if it's like an adult thinking back to what they thought when they were a teenager, as opposed to just dealing with it as if you're in that moment. And in fact, I often tell people it's better to write it as if you're yourself, however old you are, in that moment, in that situation, rather than trying to artificially pretend you're someone else. If you just give the context its due, and give the characters their due, it'll feel right. And so once I overcame that challenge, it's something where honestly I don't even know the difference now when I'm writing adult versus YA. A lot of it just happens. Like with anything else, and I'll end here. Just you create the character that you believe in, that you think is someone that people want to follow along. And if you stay true to that character, then you're gonna get in the right places, and it's gonna feel right in the finished work.
That's interesting. PC and Alison, do you feel the same way, that there's not much difference when writing YA and adult? Start PC first.
Yeah, look, I think that Sebastian's got it in a nutshell. There is a lot more reflection in an adult narrator, an adult point of view character, and possibly more room for that within that kind of storytelling. Whereas in the young adult form, when I'm writing, yeah, absolutely, I'm there. It is pushing forward, and it is also about writing on cusps. New things are happening, new experiences are being experienced. So I think about it as very much often. When I talk about it, I think the young adult protagonist is looking forward. Is always looking forward, is going, it's stepping forward. Whereas my adult protagonists, they also move forward, because of course we want a dynamic and a character with agency, but they do have that more sense of, well, I have lived through this before, and I need to reflect on that. Obviously they still have their own cusp moments, but there is this kind of thing, well, actually I can bring to that an older perspective, and I've seen more, so that's kind of stuff. So I think of it more as a looking forward, and then protagonist, and then a character or a protagonist for the adult, which has that looking back as well more often. I mean, obviously YA protagonists can reflect and do reflect, but perhaps not as much, because that can slow the pace down, and but also perhaps not with that amount of experience behind them as an adult.
Like Sebastien, I don't think, oh, I'm writing for teenagers. I'm writing YA now. I write YA like I taught high school students. I don't talk down to them. I am cognizant that their brain is not yet fully developed, and that this is the time of their lives that they're supposed to make mistakes. And that comes out a lot in my characterizations. But all I do is, the difference between YA and adult for me are the main characters. Once I create a kid who's 16, 17, I don't think, remember to be YA, remember that. I just think it's authentic for that young character. And then if my character is 36, 46, then what's authentic for her or him for that adult character. So I think it's really, really important when you write for teenagers that you know them well enough to respect them, and not to ever talk down to them, and not to ever pull punches either, because the crap they're going through is no less than what adults are going through, sometimes much more.
Mm-hmm. And I think feels to, yes, I can dimly recall my teenage years, and it was everything was very raw and very kind of, feeling, that's kind of stuff, and that has to be honored, because that is every teenager feels that kind of rawness as they develop.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Could I add just one quick thing?
Yes, sure.
Oh, I just wanted to add on to that. It's also really important to remember that when we typically write adult characters, we write with a dichotomy between how they speak and what they're thinking and feeling internally. Like people, adults might talk very cynically, but internally they're experiencing things sincerely. And I think one of the worst mistakes you can make is sometimes people go, well, to write this book, I listened to how teenagers were talking. And that's fine. You can have your character talk that way, but remember that teenagers also have an internal world. They are also presenting a face to the world and internally going through other things. And so just trusting that, your teenage protagonists aren't two-dimensional. If you could write a teenage protagonist exactly as a given teenager spoke in every context and everything they did, and it would feel hollow unless you trust that inside of them there's a lot of the same things going on that are going on inside of all of us.
That's part of what I meant when I said you need to know them, understand teenagers, and respect them. That's just showing respect for a human being who is not yet completely developed, but also deserves respect of a maturing person.
I think that, perhaps PC and Sebastien may or may not agree with me, but once you set that character in motion with the parameters that you have of that story, they cannot be two-dimensional in that sense. They must have their inner life. They must have that kind of ability to think and reflect and move forward. So really, as you both say, once I've set that character in motion, they have to be that three-dimensional person for me to be able to push them through that story. They have to be able to make the decisions, make the mistakes. And of course, the craft comes in as well. But that character, once it's set, when they are set in motion, is a full person. In what they are working through in that story.
All right, so let's talk about the themes in YA. So many YA authors have tackled or incorporated themes of social issues affecting teens and young people in their stories, including sexism, misogyny, gender-based violence. However, over the past 10 to 15 years, YA has crossed over into mainstream pop culture with the likes of the Twilight series and the Hunger Games series. There has been criticism about how tropes about violence against women and girls are often used in YA, either as a convenient plot widget or depicting a male character expressing romantic interest in a female character in very unhealthy ways. So do you think this particular criticism of YA remains relevant, or do you think that YA books and stories have evolved over the past decade to handle the issue of sexism and misogyny and VAW more appropriately, example including more depictions of healthy relationships? Let's start with PC and then go that way.
I think we're evolving. I know I'm evolving. A good example of that is when I wrote the first House of Night book. Well, I wrote it in around 2005. It was finally published in 2007. And then they came out boom, 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 like that. May the goddess help me. But I have, the series has been, the original series has been completed for many years, and they're still selling and everything. Thank you. But in 2016, I realized that the 10-year anniversaries were coming up. And I wanted to do something, which is when I wrote Loved and then Lost, Forgotten, and Found. Before I did that, it had been so long since I'd read the House of Night books, I went back and started rereading them and was mortified. I thought I had done so well about, I got the teenage voices from 2005 or mid-2000s. I nailed that. I was teaching them. They were all around me. I nailed their thoughts. I nailed all that stuff. Holy crap, man. The misogyny, even though I said it, I'm the only person I think so far, even still today, that has matriarchal vampires. The whole system was matriarchal, flat down in Tulsa in the middle of the Bible Belt. I thought I did a great job, like inclusion and dealing with sexual assault and not using that as a plot trope, right? And the whole deal. No, I did not. I did not as well as I know. So starting in 2016, I petitioned Macmillan to allow me to go back in and revise these books. And finally, they finally said yes. And I right now have rewritten the first three, Mark, Betrayed, and Chosen. And I think that evolution is not just obvious in me. I mean, Theodore Giselle, Dr. Seuss's estate, has pulled books and revised them because they did not reflect how they believed he would feel in the current climate as we have evolved as people. Those of us who care about other people have evolved as people. I, I am widely read in the YA genre, and I think the major change started happening when publishers finally did the right thing and started publishing the BIPOC voices and different cultures, and when you start opening up, which way past time for that to happen. When you start opening that up, then you start getting authentic, richer stories told from a bunch. I mean, I can and did write about Zoe Redbird, who was part Cherokee. It would have been better to write Zoe Redbird as part Cherokee had I been Cherokee. If my daughter is a woman of color, but she co-authored with me. But that's no, that we need authentic voices telling these stories. And I was like, authentic voices tell their own stories, including women telling stories about violence against women. I think that's how our genre evolves and evolves a lot.
Right. Alison?
Yeah, look, I'm going to have a small caveat here because I feel that my kind of knowledge of the last 10 years of YA is very much lacking in the last few years because I've been writing adult fiction, and so that I kind of have not been so immersed in. And so I thought, well, perhaps I would go to some experts and ask them what they thought. And some very kind, excellent YA authors came up with some interesting points that I thought I could bring up as well. Ellie Mani here, who is an excellent YA author, very well, lots of awards, and she was talking about the fact that yes, there has been a lot of progress, as you say, evolution, PC, within within that 10-year span, and also some perhaps devolution in the sense that you're talking about how Anusha, you were saying that it's become more mainstream, and with that has become a more emphasis on the romance, especially in fantasy and things like that, where there's more of a romance buying of things like that, and so within that becomes, and as Ellie points out, there's more of that spicy element, and which is perhaps bringing some problematic tropes back into the fore. But I do believe, like PC, that we have evolved a great deal. I mean, the Me Too movement has opened up our eyes to the inherent misogyny with which we live and operate in, because we are in our societies and we have absorbed these misogynistic attitudes, and so it is very hard to rid oneself of that. It is a constant work, I think, to be vigilant in one's work and one's life, to say, okay, what am I doing here? Why am I placing the male in a primary position out of reflex? No, I need to bring back it to the female. So these are the things that, as an author, there is a constant vigilance, I think, that we need to do. I think some of those tropes are still there. I mean, I'm a big Marvel fan, but my goodness me, their treatment of their female characters is a lot to be desired. I mean, how many female characters have been fridged? And
also the response from men when female characters, Marvel characters, take a lead.
Yes, yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, there's and those are particular problems with fandom and things like that. But I think that they are a barometer, perhaps, that still needs to be work done.
So, Sebastien, what do you think?
Well, the first thought that was sort of going through my mind, I think, when PC was mentioning, books written a while back that felt really appropriate at the time that then today don't, is a really important point to remember, which is that books are still a product of their time. We all want our books to be read 100 years from now, but books are a product of their cultures and they're a product of their times. And if you were to write today the most perfectly the most perfectly progressive novel that really understood and spoke the right language of today to reach people in the right way, 10 years from now, it's highly likely that book would probably benefit from a re-examination, because we see things differently as time moves by, and that whole decision of do we toss books out? Do we rewrite books? Do we accept them as a representation of their time and read them in that context? That's a very big and broad sociological discussion. But I think my experience over the last 10 years to some degree has been kind of twofold. I completely agree that the opening up of the young adult landscape to authors of wider sets of backgrounds, I think, has, above all else, produced a wider range of stories, which I think is cause for a lot of celebration among avid readers of, especially I write in the fantasy space, of fantasy, because they're just getting to see so much more and experience so much more. A trend that I've sort of witnessed inside of publishing that I found somewhat less progressive or productive, rather, has been, it was funny, when I was writing the Spellslinger series and the Argosy series, it was contracted for 2 books a year, which was quite a fast pace. And so I got to kind of watch this strange evolution of copy edits or edits, and wonderful editors, like top-notch editors working on this, but where language sort of starts to evolve and become slightly more policed. And language is meant to evolve. There's some words we just don't need anymore. But what can sometimes happen, and what I hope publishers will move away from, is a tendency to go, you know what, if we just don't talk about it, if we just don't use the bad word, if we just don't use the bad trope at all, then it's okay, right? And I found that I had a particular set of exchanges with an editor about a book, because it dealt with an issue of violence that was not very deep or explicit, but it was visceral. It amounted to a slap in the front of someone's shirt being grabbed. But I needed it to be visceral, and when you're writing, you can write a punch as somebody punches somebody, and it seems all fine to us. If you actually break down that punch into exactly what's happening, exactly what that feels like, it suddenly becomes much more disturbing. And I kind of needed this moment to be disturbing. And we had sort of this interesting back and forth about, well, could you tone it down? Could you tone it down more? And I was like, well, there's almost nothing now happening in this scene. And if we keep toning it down, what we're really saying is, you know what, let's just not talk about it. And the problem for me was, I was, in the context of this book, I was writing about something that, there's all kinds of magic going on and dark forces, but ultimately it's about, I wanted my young male readers to read something and go, you know what, you might think you're a good guy, you would never commit an act of violence against a woman. But that's pretty much what everybody thinks, including the people who are committing acts of violence against women right now. They always, we all think we're not the bad guy. And one of the ways that I think difficult and troublesome fiction can actually be really useful is to remind people, actually, you could be the bad guy sometimes, right? Like the wrong set of circumstances, and all of a sudden, you might do something wrong. And in fantasy, we have the benefit of using, magic and all these sort of other worlds to sort of create contexts for that. But I think it is important, as we try to re-examine the way that we use different tropes, and specifically tropes involving violence against women in fiction, and young adult fiction in particular, that we do it in a way that we're asking, like, what is this? How do we make this actually better for the readers, better for the communities involved, rather than just going, you know what, if we just stop talking about it, then, you know, if we just never fridge another, you know, female character, then that's just way easier than having to deal with the nuance of potentially having to explain to Twitter why, no, this, you know, death of a female character that motivates a male character is okay, whereas this one was bad. That's a very difficult thing to have to do, and nobody wants to have to deal with that level of nuance in an environment that can spark very quickly. So sorry, that was a bit long-winded, but I guess, yeah, I think we still need the troublesome topics. We need to look at them, right? And you know what? When you talk about bad relationships and troublesome relationships, kids go through those all the time. So do adults.
Yeah, I mean, we can't ignore the fact that we live in violent societies, and that it would be inauthentic to say, well, no, it's not there. And in fact, probably the antithesis of what fiction should be doing, in the sense of saying this is our society, whether it be through a fantasy society showing us in another way or in realism. This is how people are moving in these societies, and you know, as I said, it would be inauthentic to actually say no, it's not happening. But as you say, Sebastien, it needs to be re-examined and reformulated so that there is a more nuanced use of them and a more nuanced discussion around them.
Well, one of the things that drove me crazy and still does, when I taught high school for 15 years, and I'm from a family of teachers, is the parental attitude that is, oh, just don't let my child read anything with sex, curse words. These people rarely say violence, though, as interesting as that is. Don't you're going to make them want to do it. Are you kidding? Okay. There's, first of all, the internet. Okay.
Yeah.
And everything else. No, I don't understand why that type of parent can't realize that let's open up communication and let's read about these things. Let's talk, and then let's discuss. Read the books with your kid, and then let's talk about, okay, there was a blowjob in chapter 3. Let's talk about it. Was it consensual? Was it, you know, what's going on? What is it? What's going on? Well, they know what it is. But instead of shoving your head in the sand and doing a disservice to your children by banning this stuff, instead, let's talk about it. Let's read it together and let's discuss it.
Right. So that actually brings me very nicely to my next question. What Sebastien and Alison especially were talking about in terms of the depiction of boys, men, and masculinity in YA books. Do you think that this toxic alpha male character is on its way to being phased out over the past decade, or and should it be phased out, or do you think it will or should remain an in-demand archetype in YA books?
God, if only it would be phased out. It needs to be phased out in our books, and it needs to be phased out in our society.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
PC, you're going to put me out of business.
Well, I mean, there's many sort of, I mean, this needs a lot of unpacking, because there's a lot of masculine traits that are still admired within that alpha kind of characteristic, character. There's also a lot of undesirable traits within that kind of the label of the alpha male. So, you know, it's a you know, whether it can be phased out, or whether as I think PC said, things need to evolve, and so what are the traits within that alpha character, the alpha male, that people keep coming back to? Can we keep those within the kind of that strong male lead without
the males evolve emotionally or become self-aware? And if that, like, I don't, have you guys either read or seen the TV series, is it Sanctuary? Gosh darn it, I just lost it. Harlan Corbin, Shelter. That's the name of it. I just watched the finale. It's YA. It's on, I think it's on Netflix, or is it an Amazon original? I'm sorry, one of those two. It's from a YA series. And the reason I bring it up, I watched the finale last night. It was fantastic. It's wonderful. But the reason it's wonderful is because of the hero, the boy. He is set up to be what we might call an alpha male. He is a BIPOC kid. He's a mixed race, and he's very very handsome, very tall, and really good. And he's a great basketball player. He's really athletic. All the guys and everyone in his family, even the women, were athletic. This kid is so damn likable, though. Unlike the tropes of the high school jock, because he cares about other kids and he's self-aware. He's self-aware about who he is and how he comes across. And so when he deals with, at the very beginning, you see him meet this very nerdy kid. This little nerdy, skinny white boy comes in, and I was already cringing because I was waiting for him to say something mean to this kid who comes up and he's socially awkward. And the hero is not socially awkward at all. And instead, the hero begins as kind. He begins as kind to these, and that made the whole difference in it. So because he was socially aware and he's self-aware and socially mature and a compassionately based character, his alpha part, that he's a jock and he's handsome and he's athletic, that whole thing is very bearable, is very it's also it becomes very attractive then, especially from a female viewpoint, a straight female viewpoint, is he's very attractive then as a character and as a person. And I think that's how it has to evolve. And then we need to get rid of the whole tag, the name tag of alpha male, because it's so stupid and just so.
Well, it's exactly right. I mean, if so the alpha male is actually a two-dimensional character, really, in that sense. I mean, if that alpha male is three-dimensional, then there is a greater chance of that character becoming a far more understandable and a character with emotional life,
emotional maturity. Let's sprinkle in some compassion, some self-awareness. When he makes a mistake, he owns up to it. That kind of thing. And that's I think that's a good evolution of those.
I mean, there's still a lot of toxic traits around that label, I think, that definitely need to be reformulated. But I think you're quite right. I think that there's hope.
Sebastien, do you have anything to add? You already said a lot about what you thought, but
no,
you think it's still going to stick around?
Well, I think so. The challenge for me always when the subject of toxic masculinity comes up is toxic masculinity is sort of, we see it as a set of traits, but to talk about it usefully, we would have to have a set of traits that we could refer to as non-toxic masculinity that would somehow still be distinct from femininity, and I'm just not ultimately sure what those are. I guess I think of it more as toxic patriarchy, right? Like we live in a patriarchal system, and that places value on certain traits sometimes and in certain contexts, and that often feels very normal to the point of naturalness to us, which is why it sort of creeps in there. But I often think I think that it's interesting. Like I think the thing that people often don't understand or seem to understand about young, I'm going to speak specifically about young boys because that was the experience I went through as young men are constantly struggling with feelings. We always think men are always burying their feelings, don't have feelings. It's because they're mostly wrestling with their feelings and they kind of don't know what to do with them. And the alpha male is often treated as a kind of an intrinsic character, like you were just born an alpha male. But we're smart enough to not attribute that very much to female characters. We know that let's say the femme fatale, for want of a useful term, but is an archetype that most people know. We know that that's a posture. It's a role people adopt. And I think the alpha male is a role that people sometimes adopt because they don't know what else to do. And I think one of the great struggles that a lot of the male readers, and the vast majority of readers in their teens are women, are young women, but the young male readers or the teenage male readers that I deal with are often struggling with that question, like, I don't know what role to adopt, right? And so one of the places that I think young adult fiction can be really useful for is it's not that we have to bury those other tropes, it's just but what are other roles that you can show people to adopt that they can try on, right? Like teenage years are, I always feel really bad for teenagers just because of social media, because everything's captured all the time. Those are the years where you need to try things on. A lot of the times it's not going to work. You're going to screw it up. You'll say or do the wrong thing. And you need to be able to, rather than solidify and find a tribe that will support you in that behavior, which is often a very toxic behavior, be able to shift gears. And so what I often try to do, one of the things, some people will sometimes criticize this in the Spellslinger books. Farius Parfax is an older woman who happens to be the mentor to this young teenage man, 16-year-old teenage guy. And that was like, that was sort of shocking at first to people for some reason, but it just happened to be my experience as a young teenager that my mentors happened to be women in their 30s and 40s. And she often, refers to him having to learn how to be a man. And, he'll sort of go, for a woman, you like talk about being a man a lot. And she's like, well, you're going to have to figure it out somehow, because like, that's where you are. You're going to figure out what it means to you. And that's the thing. And I think often I think we intrinsically know that the world would be a lot better if we didn't have any of these sort of gender roles that we'd all kind of grown up with. We haven't yet figured out how to move past them. And so if you're like, one day I think we're going to get this figured out. We're going to get everything figured out. We're going to hopefully, gender will disappear. In the meantime, we still have all these teenagers, and a lot of them are our readers, who are going, I don't know what kind of young woman I want to be. I don't know what kind of young man to be. And so I think rather than eliminating the tropes, it's about going, what are some other tropes we can introduce? And then they can be contrasted. And just as PC said with the show she's referencing, which I haven't seen, but it sounds like is saying, hey, here's another role you can try to adopt and see how, try it on for size.
That's a really good point. All right, so over the past decade, the Pixel Project, we've received emails from teens and parents telling us about how our work with YA authors via Read for Pixels has helped them talk about or take action to address VAW, sexism, and misogyny in their families, in schools, and communities. So we have to ask you all, as authors who may have attended YA conventions or met or heard from some of your young readers over the years, how would you say attitudes in the YA community or YA fans are towards sexism, misogyny, and violence against women? How have they changed or not changed over the years? Start with PC.
I think they're changing because the kids are changing. And our society, thankfully, is also changing. And I think that's being reflected in the work. Because the kids are so, they're really good at picking out toxic things that they are beginning to grow out of, that our society is thankfully beginning to grow out of. Like Sebastien, when you said at the very beginning, when you were speaking before, and you were talking about male traits and female traits, I immediately wanted to say, although I didn't want to talk over you, I immediately wanted to say why it's going to be better when there aren't male traits and female traits. And you concluded by that too, that when it's just people, when it's just human beings growing and learning. I think that is a lot of young people with the ability to say, I don't want to say she, I don't want to say he, call me they, call me them. The non-binary, the fluidity in the young gender roles. I love that. I love that how they're evolving beyond the tropes, the stereotypes. And I think that's super healthy. And I think that's thankfully where we're headed. And our work needs to be reflective of that. I think it is. I think it's become, we do tend to backslide in romantasy sometimes.
Yeah.
Even the term romantasy. But I like to believe that there are a lot of YA authors who are doing it and doing it well.
Alison?
I really admire the vigilance and the vocal kind of chutzpah of of fans these days. I mean, yes, it can tip sometimes into something that's not great, but you know that they're saying, well, this is not acceptable. You know, and yeah, this is, I'm not going to read this because it's not where I want to be. And when I think about that, I think about myself. You know, when I was reading the YA fiction in the 70s, and it was, you know, I would never have even thought to have questioned what was going on there. It was like I read the books and then, you know, absorbed them, enjoyed them, and that kind of stuff. But I don't think I would have thought, oh, I'm going to go march up to this author at a convention and say, you know what, this character, nah. So I really admire that. But I do say to all those people who are, you know, do have that strength and ability to do that, to say, remember, the author is also a person. Just remember that as well.
Well, there's a difference between attacking the person and correcting an author.
Yeah,
there's a line there that shouldn't be crossed. But
yeah. So yeah, I've seen some fairly kind of, you know, some confrontational things, and I thought, well, you know, okay, they want to have their say, and that's fine. And people are learning how to actually voice those preferences, and we are all learning. We are constantly learning. I mean, I think this is a very turbulent time in YA and in literature itself. You know, I think that we are all evolving new ways of talking about our craft and our readerships and things like that. And so we are all constantly learning, making mistakes, you know, needing to apologize and accept, you know, our mistakes. So yeah, I think that is a kind. Yeah, I think that it is quite an exciting time of evolution.
Sebastien?
Yeah, let us, I hope and pray, never become too good at speaking. Like, this is going to be my hopefully only two contrarian points. I agree. I noticed that a lot, that young people have a much more sophisticated use of language around these issues than certainly I did or my contemporaries did when I was their age. The part that I'm never quite sure of when I see the rest of their behavior is, have they, you know, are they internal? You know, we talked at the beginning about the difference between like how a character speaks and then what's going on the inside. And I'm never quite sure if what's going on the inside has that same level of evolution, which is very hard to achieve, right, for all of us, as the way they speak. Like, there's a degree to which we're trying to teach each other, look, just never say the wrong things. And then in the hopes that that's going to transform the internal landscape. But one of the problems that I often see now that I didn't have to deal with as a teenager, teenagers have gotten very good at not bullying each other in the, you know, the locker room. But they tear each other apart behind the scenes in social media. Mm-hmm. And some of the effects of those are, I would argue, at least if not worse, on the victims of those experiences. And in fact, you know, you'll then, you know, the people doing that will say, as I was saying before, you know, nobody thinks of themselves as the bad person, the bad guy. Those people like, bullying? I would never bully anyone. I'm not, you know, I'm not that kind. I don't shove someone. I don't say these bad words. I just happen to comment on how somebody happened to sort of look that day, but only in this way and only to the other, you know, and there's this whole sort of web of how these interactions work. So that's the part that I generally am more cautious about in terms of the feeling of progress. It is good that now we have more sophisticated concepts to talk about in these areas. But again, we have to then go, okay, now how do we deal with the feelings that led to those negative behaviors in the past, because those also have to be addressed. And the last thing I want to say, because we were talking about toxic tropes and toxic relationships in particular, and I'm mindful of the fact that in the romance space, which is not a space to which I'm an expert, but you have all of these things like the classic, the whatever Scottish Highland lord who kidnaps the woman, and and then she falls madly in love with him and stuff. And I think as much as people have tended to denigrate romance as a genre, and I think that's moving away because we've sort of all realized that they're the ones making all the real money now. That there was sort of an acknowledgement that, okay, those are fantasies, and women are allowed to have fantasies, right? And people are allowed to have fantasies. My eldest brother, who I loved, he's passed away now. He was a classic gay man of the the 70s and stuff, who would read like scads of Harlequin romance novels. And I'd go, why are you reading these things? He's like, because it's so easy to put yourself in the place of the heroine, and we never think that the women who read those books are somehow adopting the negative implications of those tropes. But I think in like, we don't think that the women who adore the Highland fantasy sort of Highland romance stuff, or the cop romance, or whatever, all these different sort of categories. My favorite's Amish romance. I have no idea what the hell anybody does read that, but they love it. We don't think that they're suddenly that those women are, or those readers, male and female, are going, oh yeah, I want to enforce this idea. That's what I want to have happen to me. But we have tended to say, oh no, if you like Twilight, he's a vampire, he's 200 years old. Like, we somehow assume that the young women that happen to read those books and go, oh, Edward Cullen's so dreamy, are then going to go off and want to marry a 75-year-old doddering guy. And I just don't think that's the case. So I hope that we can still leave room for people to have their fantasies and have their source of their fantasies, and accept that people can fantasize about things without, even things that we would find absolutely abhorrent in real life, without saying, therefore you therefore must actually want that in real life. And I think one of the worst things that happens in interactions between men and women in real life is that I've seen in my own life is men going, wait, I saw that movie that you liked where the guy behaved like this and I'm behaving like that. Why are you acting like I'm a horrible misogynist? Well, because you are a horrible misogynist. That's a fantasy, and this is real life. So we have to, I think, give some of that space to younger readers as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I'm just gonna go off on a little bit of a tangent here. There's this YouTube channel called Cinema Therapy. I don't know if y'all know about it, where these two men, one is a psychologist and one is a filmmaker, they break down films, and they kind of analyze the characters from a point of a psychologist and analyze their behavior. And they've done a really good series on the Twilight movies. And I was one of those people who were like, oh, how can you like Twilight? But they made the same point that you did, Sebastien, where they said, like, it's totally fine if you like it as a fantasy. It's fun. There's a vampire, and it's a romance, and yeah, there's werewolves and whatever. But you have to draw a line between what is real and what is not. So I would recommend everyone to go and check out Cinema Therapy and watch those analysis of the Twilight movies. Right, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just thinking off the top of my head there, is there kind of a lack of trust within the industry that the teenagers are able to do that? Why would that be?
As a longtime teacher of teenagers, there is a difference between, I was going to mention that too, but there's a difference between, of course, me reading something that would be a fantasy for me, but abhorrent in my life, and a 16-year-old young woman reading the same thing, or young man reading the same thing and thinking it's a maturity thing. But I do tend to agree, though, that we should be allowed our fantasies and not judged by. I get really irritated about the romance stereotypes, and it's not just that women make a lot of money writing romance. It's also that it too has evolved, and there's still like the Scottish Highlander, but today the Scottish Highlander is a woman, and that kind of thing. So
well, it's just I'm thinking that this need for, we do need fantasy in our lives, and we practice things in kind of fantastical settings. And I think that maybe to allow, as you say, Sebastien, allows the space in the YA area to say, well, these are practice areas. We are not only practicing roles, but we're also practicing that division between reality and fantasy and entertainment and that kind of thing. And that is an important part of developing as a consumer of art. How are we reacting to it? What is fantasy? What is roles that I can take on? So I think that there is that need to say, well, there needs to be trust there as well.
I think the trust comes with communication. Like Sebastien hit it right on the head when he said, when you were talking about when you saw like a fantasy movie with your partner or whoever, and then you were behaving like the fantasy hero, and she's like, you're a misogynistic mess, and you're like, yeah, but that's what you liked. and she's like on screen. Okay. I think it's the same thing, a big same thing in YA. It's like, okay, let's talk about it now. That's why I always talk to parents about read what your kids are reading and talk to them about it, because then your kid can come to you, and like Mai did when she read an old werewolf book that was really, really very sexually explicit for a YA book, and I can't remember the title right now, but my daughter's 36, so it was years and years and years ago. But she came to me and talked to me about it, and I was reading the same book she was reading on purpose, and I was like, whoa, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And then we discussed it. And I mean, so many people have said to me, because Kristen and I co-author, of course. She didn't write any of the House of Night. She was my Teen Voice editor. But people on tours over and over again have said, isn't it awkward to write sex scenes with your daughter? And now Kristen and I do co-author. We've co-authored several series, and there are sex scenes in them. And Kristen and I always say no. We've been talking about sex to each other since she was she's 36, since she was like a kid. And no, it's not awkward at all when you have open communication with your child. And that it's just, so I think that the fantasy aspect, especially of YA books, and the aspect where that might be something I like to read about, the guy with the sword and, ooh, Thor, come get me. Ooh, that kind of thing. It's good to, if that's what you kind of like to read, but would never want it in your life, then be able to talk about that. Talk about the guy the boy you're dating. Talk about that with your mom, your dad. Hey, is it weird that I like this, but I don't really like this? That kind of thing. It's part of emotional maturity. And I think our young men, like you were talking, Sebastien, about how they say, I don't know how to feel. I don't know who I am. If they talked about how they felt more, and it's so good that one of the escapes they have is to email you or to message you about that, is our young men need to be able to voice their feelings and voice their struggles and voice their questions and their questioning of their self and their self fears. Like women do, young women and older women do much better at that. And we need to allow that space. It's one of the reasons patriarchy is so damn destructive, because it stops young men from doing that. It makes them weak then and not manly. Well, the strongest people I know are all women. None of them are weak. None of them are also manly.
So this brings me really nicely to a question from the audience, which PC, you've actually kind of answered this already, but I'm going to ask it for everyone else. So Misty306, hi Misty, asks, you're all authors who have no issues writing realistic teens. Why is it teens, librarians, and teachers can accept these portrayals of teens, but some parents cannot?
Respect.
Yeah.
It's respect. There are a lot of parents, and I know from a long time of teaching and having lots of parent-teacher conferences, there are a lot of parents who don't respect their kids and also don't communicate with their kids and don't get really involved in their kids' lives, like read the same books. I actually had a parent tell me one time, she signed off that her child was allowed to check this book out of my classroom library, a huge classroom library. And every Friday was novel day, and my kids read all day and then wrote reports about what they read. And so I made them all sign papers and have their parents sign and say it's okay for my kid to read this book on novel day. She did that. And then she complained when she found out that there was a very, very mild lesbian sex scene in this fantasy book. I mean, so mild, I read the book and didn't even remember it. So, and she and I were having a conversation about it. And I said, but you signed this and said that it was okay for your child to read it. Well, I didn't read the book. And I said, why not? I don't have time to read a book. She wanted the government to put warning labels on it to rate them for us, like, yes, to rate them for us, G, PG. I said, so you would rather have the government censor your child than simply communicate with your child and read? Yes. Okay, okay, nothing I can do. There's nothing, I've got nothing now. But I think that's it. I think it comes down to respect and communication. Teachers, librarians, authors, we respect our audience. We respect teens. And there's too many parents who don't.
Alison, what do you think?
Well, I think PC's just basically has the knowledge to answer that. I mean, I've got nothing to add to that because it's true. I believe that that's right. Yeah, it's kind of, you know, we write realistic teens because we are writing, you know, that is how we create the experience that we're hoping to you know, the readers are hoping to experience, and sometimes that realism, even within the fantasy genre, you know, can feel, I suppose it's threatening to parents, because it is saying, well, here is the society that your child is growing up in, you know, whether it be mirrored in a fantasy society or whether it's realism. So yeah, but I can't add much more. It was a perfect answer.
Sebastien?
Yeah, so I'm not a parent, but what I do notice is that just as in other parts of our lives, we're all being constantly inundated with things to be afraid of. Parents are constantly being slammed with all the things they're supposed to be afraid of, and a lot of them probably don't have a lot of time to sort of read and evaluate, and so, you know, their sort of instinctive reaction tends to be, as in other contexts, you know, you find out your kid's drinking, or you find out your kid, you know, crashed cars, and you have to clamp down, right? Like the good old, what was it, you know, when you stop your kid from going out for, you know, past 6 o'clock for a month as a punishment or something, you know, that instinct to clamp down is probably really strong. And I guess what I'd rather existed instead of, you know, let's say warning labels on books, which of course we know are the kind of a incredibly fatuous sort of concept generally. But what I'd rather was that it was just a statement from the author saying, look, we know you care about your kids. We care too. They're like the people that we're trying to read. We're not, you know, we're aware of what we're writing. We're aware that when you talk about sex or drugs, or the one, as PC rightly pointed out, is far too often overlooked, violence seems to be the most acceptable thing in the universe now. But we're aware of those things, and we're writing. We're trying to write them in a way that doesn't cause harm to the readers, because we wouldn't be writing for these readers if we didn't care about them, if we didn't believe that they were important, worthy people, and worthy of our respect, and therefore, you know, our efforts. So I think it's that always feels like, you know, to answer that original question from Misty 306, that always feels like the missing layer. And I don't know how you know, create that, because we're probably not going to stick a letter in every book that says to the parent, trust us. We're not going to tell you what's in the book. We're not going to read it, but you can trust that we are trying very, very hard to do right by your kid.
Yeah, we care. We honestly care.
And we go through extensive editing processes that, you know, are now becoming more and more aware of these things. You know, editors are fabulous, you know.
And sensitivity readers now. I don't know if you guys have worked with them, but I've been working with sensitivity readers for several years now. I like, especially in books that I write with Kristen, there's a lot of diversity, and we love working with sensitivity readers.
Yeah, and so it's not like we just kind of we're chucking out whatever comes into our heads, you know. we are.
We're also not doing this part. Ooh,
yeah.
What can I make kids think about?
Yes. We're telling stories, you know. We're telling stories and that are close to our own hearts, that we want to tell, that are important to us, and that importance makes us treat it with honor. So we treat our readers with honor as well.
We're not trying to screw up your kids, we promise.
Okay. All right. So let's get down to the nuts and bolts of storytelling for YA authors who would like to tackle violence against women in their stories. What are some of the techniques that YA authors can use to turn toxic tropes that are rife with sexism, misogyny, or violence against women on their heads, and perhaps even use them to send a message to the reader that VAW is never acceptable? We'll start with PC and go that way.
Don't use violence against women as one of your plot devices. You don't use it to move. If that's the basic plot of your book, think harder about it. Decide. Also, you know, statistically, 1 in 3 women have been sexually assaulted. I am a survivor of rape. I was raped when I was 13, and by a man. That's how I lost my virginity. So I intimately know what a 13-year-old feels like who's being sexually assaulted. And if I did not, I would use a sensitivity reader. I would hire one, or talk to. You need to hire one, because there's a difference between someone who's been sexually assaulted when they're a kid and then someone who has been trained to be a sensitivity reader. But I think sensitivity readers are awesome in that, especially if you're an author who has not been through what your character is going through. But also, don't take the easy way out. You don't use violence against women. I mean, I had to stop reading and watching all the Game of Thrones. And I mean, I love fantasy. I love high fantasy. I'm so effing tired of women being used as a violence against women being used as a damn plot device. Think harder, George R.R. Martin, okay? And the rest of the authors, especially predominantly old white dudes who can't get past anything except, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to make this war? Let's slit a woman's throat and rape her. You know, come on, figure it out. Try something. Think harder. Do better. This is beyond. I'm sorry, it makes me really angry.
Yeah, I figured.
Sexual
rightfully so.
When I was a kid,
yeah.
It's just like, come
on. I think that, you know, that if we are discussing our societies within our craft and art, then the acknowledgement of violence, either against women or men or non-binary people, can sometimes be there. Yeah, it is part of that kind of world that you're creating. I would suggest, as a writer, that obviously, as PC says, not as a plot device. You know, that especially in that kind of fridging way, or, you know, this is the, you know, this woman's death is creating the rage of a man to go and tell a story. No, that's, you know, it's time to move on from that. But, you know, I think that it is about the creation of the character and their inner life and their three-dimensionality as a character, so that when and if sort of a violent action happens, that there is a character who can reflect, who can live through that experience with within the confines of what you've created, so that it becomes not the sum of them, of them as a character, but becomes part of a way that they're moving through the world. I mean, people do move through the world with trauma, and and characters to show that way, to say that, well, yes, we can move through trauma through the world and move through it, is a valuable thing. I think that it's a reflection of what is what a lot of people are experiencing. So yes, I think that if you are incorporating violence into your work, and better if not as PC, but there are stories that involve it, then really make sure that the point of view character is created in enough dimensionality to be able to create a story that deals with that in a way that is not just offhand or not even addressed. I think that if violence is in a story, it needs to be addressed, in a way not only just happen, but you have that scenes afterwards where that is either discussed or the effects of that are shown. It is not just, oh yeah, James Bond type violence. Shoot 'em up, move on. Nothing happens, with internally or externally. That doesn't happen. People do not live in a vacuum, or characters do not live in a vacuum and should not live in a vacuum. If they enact violence or they experience violence, it has an effect, and it's important that that effect is explored within the story. So yeah, that's what I would suggest.
Sebastien, what do you think?
Well, my primary expertise in this arena is being the old white man who wrote a 650,000 word 4-book series that's entirely motivated by the death of the main character's wife, and I think there is real value in recognizing, if I think when PC says plot device. I think the warning that she's giving to writers is like plot device in the sense of a disposable utility to move from chapter 1 to chapter 2. And in the case of the Greatcoats, for me, that series can't exist without the death of Falkea's wife that drives him a little bit nuts and motivates it. And over the course of the series, we see why. And, at first we sort of assume the classic, I must, how dare, this is so horrible. I've gone mad. I will now kill everybody. Until we finally sort of realize by the 4th book that all of the Greatcoats, the reforming the Greatcoats, these traveling magistrates, this, thing for justice, is him trying to live up to the example of his wife. Because it wasn't just that she died protecting him. And so, he says at a certain point in the series, she was the first Greatcoat, and so that's always the thing. Like whatever the trope is, yes, as a writer, if you're watching this and you're a new writer, all the tropes, all of those things that we call tropes, are available to you. The question is, what do you want to do with them? It's not saying do or don't have violence against women in your book. It's asking why in particular do you want to do this, and what is it you want to say with it? What do you, how is it going to inform the rest of the book? That's a very difficult thing. Like that's something that sort of sounds good when you say it out loud, or sounds sensible when you say it out loud. It's very difficult to apply, and so. The tactical suggestion I make is to think about and really learn as a writer, almost before you learn anything else, learn about agency. Characters having agency. What is the agency of this character? So one of the reasons why I think what we call fridging or woman in the refrigerator is a trope, it was identified by a fantastic writer who started in comics named Gail Simone, who literally had a blog where she would post every incident. And of course, the original girlfriend in the refrigerator was literally from a Green Lantern comic, which is a weird place to have it, where the character suddenly comes home and literally his girlfriend is in the refrigerator. But it's done as a sort of such a throwaway. And so the problem of the woman in the refrigerator is that you go, how do you give that character agency now? right, you killed her off, and now her male boyfriend or husband or whatever is now, in a fury. Okay, how do you give her agency now? Because you've already kind of killed her off. And that was always the challenge in writing the Great Cut series, is I had to find ways for Aline to have agency inside of that story, both in terms of her previous actions and also Falchio's sort of memories of her, the things she said, the things she did. Like, I had to bring her to life as a character after her death. And so that's, if that sounds challenging, it is. And that's why, in some ways, if you're not sure what you want to do or how to do it, then for goodness sake, don't bother doing it. There's a lot of other ways to create conflict and drama. But fundamentally, if you can figure out, and it's the same when you're talking about if you have a character who's on the page, if Fate of the Argosy, the third Argosy book, which is the one that just came out, we have a character who, Farius, who's a young woman, it's another young woman, a friend of hers, she's rescued from this prison. It is notoriously the most vicious, horrible prison on the continent, and we know she's been there for a year, and we don't know what happened. And in fact, Arissa says to her, like, don't start supposing you know what happened. Don't start supposing you know what I did to survive it. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to talk about it with you. And so that is a way of giving that character agency over their experiences. The challenge always, and this is something I face as a person of a particular background and privilege, is always going, here's this thing you want to write about. Okay, what's the Venn diagram over which I connect to this? Mm-hmm. So I can't connect to the experience that PC describes. So what's the place I can connect to that, where I can talk about that intelligently and dramatically? And so sometimes that's what you're going to do. You're going to write from the perspective not of the character who's experienced the sexual violence, for example, but the character who is dealing with them and trying to do the right thing by them and not knowing how to do that. And so as long as you kind of allow nuance and complexity to interfere with your writing as much as possible, by giving every character agency, then you can usually find your way through these things.
Yeah. I mean, the character that you're describing is not living in a vacuum. There is reaction. There is trauma within that of what he experienced, and that I think it's which when you're talking about agency, obviously the agency of the woman, which sounds like you did a great job creating that kind of sense of that woman as a real character, not just that, oh, well, she's dead now, we're moving on into fury. And that's, that it is so important to have that kind of, well, yes, we are not left in that vacuum of, yeah, well, okay, moving on now. There is that ongoing sense of character and purpose and trauma.
Yes.
Well, also there's a big difference in, like, Sebastien, if there's the event that kicked off the plot in your novel, but then you didn't. But like the example you gave from book 3, where we know this woman has been brutalized, and she has a boundary and says, you know what, I'm not talking about it. It's my choice. I'm not. This isn't something we're going to discuss. The difference between handling it like that and also showing your dead characters that she's fully rounded, that she wasn't just a victim of violence, that she had a life and was a full person to her husband, is so much different than, like, and I hate to bash Game of Thrones over and over again, but it's an easy one to it's an easy example. We don't need that violence to be propagated over and over and over again in every book in explicit detail, and so often against women. There's a difference between handling it at the beginning, having it, that's what kicks off, what's going on, and then being very thoughtful in how you dealt with it, and then just repeating it over and over and over again. And too many male-driven fantasies repeat violence against women over and over and over.
Well, and I think just to jump in on that as well, I think George R. R. Martin has spoken about this, and he said, look, this is a time of war. He's patterned this on the War of the Roses. This thing's happening all the time, and that is an excuse that we often give, and it's valid, except that the difference between fiction and statistics is that fiction is always lending meaning to events, and so as you say, and I think it's important to distinguish the TV. Stopped reading the books at a certain point, so I don't know where they sort of went. But the TV show, did start to feel sometimes like it was just, okay, let's throw this on the screen. How are we going to fill the second act of episode 6? And the problem is, if you're not lending meaning, if you're not posing a question of that event, right, which is a simple thing to do, right? Any event that you have, somebody kicks a dog, okay, why? And what are you trying to say with them kicking up? You apply that to everything. And, there's a thing everybody sort of knows how to do, I think, these days, a little better than a lot of early fantasy, back in the day, or some of the really sort of dull fantasy, which was, we talk about, always remember the villain is the hero of their own story. And so when we write villains now, like, we're all trying to go, okay, I got to think about it from the villain's perspective. And how are they the actual hero of this story from their perspective? We tend to also write a lot of victims in our fiction. It's worth taking a few minutes as a writer to go, how's the victim, who I've designated as the victim or the survivor, how are they the hero of a story? Mm-hmm. And even you don't have to make them the main character. You don't have to even center them necessarily, but you have to give them their due, right? Mm-hmm. Give them their voice in some fashion.
I think it's about writing two-dimensional characters.
And I was just going to say that it's also worthwhile to try and step back from your own work. I'm going to the question of people who are writing, to step back from your work and say, what actually am I saying here? What is it? What actually am I saying? Because readers do read symbols. Yeah, we do read a lot of symbology. There is this kind of innate ability to create patterns and to look for meaning. And so when you are having that person pick the dog, just step, as Sebastien says, step back, but really step back and say, actually, on a wider picture of what I am trying to create in this story, does this fit? Do I really need this here? What is it saying? I think that you can get very close to your own work, and you're just sort of writing, creating scenes and that kind of stuff. But I would say occasionally step back and say, oh, okay, if I have, this particular action happening here, then what might my reader garner from that? And it's a useful way of saying, okay, is this actually what I want to say here? Because sometimes you can, and even writers who have been writing for a very long time can write something, and then when we step back and say, oh, I didn't realize that was the message that was being sent. It's not where I want to go. I need to rewrite.
It's the rereading of the House of Night books.
Yeah. It's kind of like, that's what.
Right. So before I go on to my next question, I want to bring everyone's attention to the fact that PC has a dog on her lap.
Because I was afraid you guys were going to go, because there's 4 of them. And this is the culprit of the dog fight.
No, he's so cute. And we did see Sebastian's cat tail just now.
A houseboat.
Oh, cat!
Puppy!
Yeah, okay.
See how interested she is in being the star.
Come on, Bucky, you got to go and show yourself. Come on, darling. Here he comes.
We're having a little animal break.
Having an animal time.
There we go.
Oh, there's another terrier. That's right.
Oh, hello. Oh, so cute.
Dad, why did you put me on there? Why?
Yay. Okay, so the audience is loving it. Say doggy. All the pets. All right. Yes. Thank you all for your pet tax. We appreciate it. Right. Okay. So here are my last couple of questions. Okay, so let's talk about tips and recommendations for the wider YA community, by which we mean authors, readers, editors, and publishers, with regards to doing better when it comes to the issue of violence against women. Do you have any tips and suggestions for publishers and editors who wish to join in efforts to address sexism, misogyny, and violence against women in the YA space?
Listen to women. As we are speaking of our experiences, believe us, and then support us as we are reflecting in our work. It was very interesting during House of Night. One of my main characters, the antagonist, the protagonist, antagonist, the bad guy, Nefret, she was very, very bad. And we find out that that her whole journey to evil began when she was raped by her father as a young girl. And during the series, I was asked to write novellas that tell the backstories of some of the main characters. And Neferet's backstory is the one that I told, is one of the 4 that I told, and I took her through the rape. I added a letter to it, and I very much wanted to say in that letter that I am a survivor of sexual assault too, when I was a very young girl, younger than Neferet even was. And I got pushback from I love my publisher. I got pushback from him back then about, won't that traumatize your readers, your young readers, to know that you have experienced sexual assault? And I said, no, I don't think so, because I'm not defined by being a survivor. I am a survivor. I've healed. I did therapy. I think that it's the opposite. I think had they allowed me, and I've spoken about this many times since and written about it and everything, but I think had they allowed me to add in the letter, hey, I am a survivor of this. I know that many of you are dealing with this. You can survive. You can come out. And I think that helps. I think allowing us to tell our authentic stories and then acknowledging why these stories are authentic really helps.
Yes, he agrees. Okay, Sebastien, we go to you first.
Sorry.
I think publishers could give money. One of the problems that I feel I see a lot because remember, when we're talking about publishers, we're talking about corporations. Corporations could be good and bad, and they're full of good and bad people. But too often there's this sort of I don't know, for want of a better term, a sort of corporate virtue signaling of going, okay, look, we're talking about this, and we're putting this new meme on our on our Twitter feed and something, and we're all 3 of us are donating a little bit of our time. We're donating some books and stuff, which we then have to ship to people, and we're and that's a very small contribution. But if publishers just gave that equivalent for every one of the books they're publishing each year, or even just went, every book we publish that's got violence against women in it, we'll make this donation, we'll pay the carbon tax, so to speak. Then that would be something I think real, and that's the thing we really have to remember. We get very, very interested in words and statements and publicity. But violence against women isn't a topic. It's something that's happening. It's not a problem because it's in books. It's a problem because it's happening in real life. It doesn't need to be stopped just in books. It needs to be stopped in real life. So I guess that's the thing. I think in terms of the publishing industry is just to ask itself is, okay, how do you do something in real life and not just in terms of social media statements?
It's a really good point.
Yeah, Alison?
I've always had very good experiences with editors in terms of discussing violence in books, and I think that editors, there are sometimes legitimate reasons within the storytelling, and then there's and I think that it's important to be open to both sides of that, to know, and to I mean, it's very much an art form. Is when do you pull back on violence in books, and when does it, I think I suppose in the sense what I'm trying to say is that there is a kind of great trust between editor and author, and that needs to be fostered, to find the level that's within that particular story, and to listen to the author. I mean, I know that I put up a good argument for when I want to keep things, and when and I know when to sort of say, okay, that's right, we've got to move that. But new authors, I think, can sometimes feel a little lacking in leverage, if you like, not able to fight for their own corner. And so, yes, I think that perhaps to just listen and give support to new authors, to be able to explain and perhaps develop, to give them the time to develop. I know that in the past, probably, I've been publishing for a very long time. The time that is allowed for editing has become shorter and shorter. That kind of relationship has become more truncated, just by the pressures of the industry. So I would say, we need those times to tease out and to make sure that the messages and the language is right around these areas, and to just not throw it into copy editing and off we go, kind of stuff. There needs to be that discussion at that level, and to give that time. I ask the publishers, to say, rebuild the editing staff, because we've seen it being whittled away in publishing houses. But this is such an important relationship. It's a relationship that can create works that are going to be discussed and have nuance. And and I think that there might be a little bit of space for that to be rebuilt within the industry.
Okay, so here's my final question for everyone. Which YA books would you recommend for YA authors and readers to check out as examples of violence against women being handled well as a theme? So we'll start with...
Now,
okay.
I'm a piece of paper here from. I've got some from Ali Mani. From Ali Mani, who is an award-winning young adult writer here, has given me some great titles that deal with her own book, None Shall Sleep. Let's see, the Courtney Summers with Sadie, Mindy McGuinness, The Female of the Species, Hannah Capon, Foul is Fair, and of course Angie Thomas in Thug, THUG. So those are from Ali Mani, and I thank Ali for supplying those to me, because I'm not within the kind of space at the moment, and those are up to date.
Great. Kizzy?
The classic Speak by Laura Halsey Anderson, The Roundhouse by Louise Erdich. Make sure I say her name. That's never mind. I'm not going to talk about why they're so awesome. I'll just talk about it. I'll just give you this. Warrior Girl Unearthed by Angeline Boulay. When Women Were Dragons. This isn't YA, but everyone should read it. By Kelly Barnhill. Women literally turn into dragons. And then, of course, Cherie Dimeline's amazing duology, The Moral Thieves and Hunting by Stars.
Sebastien?
Well, it's funny. I'll talk briefly about Louise Ehrlich's The Roundhouse. Which
you love that book?
It's a really wonderful book, and it's a really good example of showing how you can write about a character. In this case, it's about a young man,
and his mom is the one who lived through the sexual abuse. Yeah,
and by using opacity of what both two kinds of opacity. So allowing that young character to both, there's things the young character doesn't know because the mom's not going to talk about it to her son, but also the opacity of understanding, which is something Louise Ehrlich does. I believe it's Ehrlich does incredibly well, which is showing us something that we, the reader, can see, but we can also see that our narrator isn't fully understanding. And so that's a really good example of using nuance in this issue of violence against women in a really thoughtful way. And you can read it and you can think, well, I would do this differently. And that's one of the things I love about books that handle things with nuance, is they give you the space to go, maybe I would do it this way, maybe I wouldn't do it this way, having those options. The other one the one that always comes to mind, or one that comes to mind for me that I really adored, which may seem a bit out of left field, is Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wine, which is a book set in World War II. It is a young adult novel. It's about these two young women who end up dealing with the war, the British, and one of them is at the beginning of the book is captured by the Nazis in this case. And so what's interesting is it shows a take on violence that is happening to a woman and what she's dealing with it and the trauma from it, but that is not specifically sexualized in any way. Sometimes it's interesting, even in the classic kind of Law and Order shows, a woman is murdered, and even if sexual violence isn't part of it, somehow there's always this sort of sexual veneer lent on top of it. Whereas this is a book where it's like, no, it's because she's a spy, and it's because she's done it. She's trying to fight for her country, and so the things she's experiencing are the things that male soldiers are experiencing as well. And so it's just a very different take that I've seen in a lot of places, where how that violence is being understood and addressed by this character, and who is traumatized by it as it goes. And so and it's just a fantastic book.
Great, thank you for your recommendations. We have a comment from Missy again, who is a librarian, by the way, and she says Summers and Beginnings are very popular YA suspense authors. And she says yes. I think that was to your recommendation of Codename Verity. So I'm gonna go check that one out as well. All right, so that has brought us to the end of our question round. So thank you so much to our panel for answering the questions and giving us such amazing in-depth answers. And thank you for everyone's questions. We couldn't get to all of them, but there was a nice discussion going on in the chat box as well. So before we wrap up, in case anyone out there missed it, I'm just going to tell everyone again about the amazing and exclusive goodies that PC, Alison, and Sebastien have donated to us, and we've put into our Rally Up fundraising page. So Alison's ready. So first is Alison's. She's offering 2 Ill-Mannered Ladies bundles. So these comprise of 1 signed and personalized US first edition paperback of the Benevolent Society of Ill-Mannered Ladies, plus a signed matching bookmark. So there are 2 of these available for donors worldwide.
And they're adults. Yeah, they're adult.
Yes, they're adult books. Yes, we should make that clear. But I mean, listen, anyone can read them. So PC has very kindly offered an amazing set. So it comprises of 4 of the books of her latest blockbuster series, Tales of a New World, which are Moon Chosen, Sun Warrior, Wind Rider, and Earth Called, plus 4 bonus books, which are also hardback, signed, and personalized. And this is from the House of Night spin-off, Love, Lost, Forgotten, and Found. So that's 8 books altogether. And this is going to 1 generous donor in the US. And finally, Sebastien is offering 2 gorgeous bundles for donors in the US and Canada. The first is the Argosy bundle, which is, there it is, the complete set of the Argosy series, all hardcover, signed and personalized for you. Way of the Argosy, Fall of the Argosy, Fate of the Argosy, 1 handwritten note from Farius Parfax, the lead character of the Argosy books, 1 exclusive set of Argosy cards, and 1 8-gig USB Spellslinger key. And the second bundle is the Malevolent 7 bundle, which is a signed and personalized hardcover of the Malevolent 7. It's a bit difficult to say that title. And then 1 set of 12 Wondrous cards and a special bookmark. So these two are still available, and for donors in the US and Canada. And there are also plenty more author goodies, more goodies from other authors, including Anne Bishop, Brandon Sanderson, Charlene Harris, Emily XR Pan, Jasper Ford, Jen Williams, Mary Robinette Kowal, Mimi Matthews, Eliza James. We have bundles from Subterranean Press and more. And they're all on our Rally Up fundraising page. We've raised $5,200, which is 52% towards our $10,000 goal so far. So please do give generously before the fundraiser ends in October, which is just next month. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. So I'm going to share a little slide here. So to get the goodies, go to our Rally Up fundraising page, the tinyurl.com/r4p Rally Up 2023. If you're typing this, it's case sensitive, but our producer Regina has put the link in the chat box, so go and click on that. And if you want to find out more about Read for Pixels, about all of the panels we've had before and coming up, and the authors that we've had, go and check out our Read for Pixels page on our website. So all the authors we've had are there, and you can find out the schedule as well. So we also want to share something about our Shirley Jackson Award nominated and Audio Award nominated charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due. These are 16 short horror stories. It's kind of like where the Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Woman. It's available in ebook, paperback, audiobook, and from major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Audible, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, Spotify, Google Play, and more. Anywhere you can find audiobooks and ebooks, it's there. It's a limited edition. It's only available until 31st October. So get your copy or copies now. You can go to Giving the Devil His Due page on our website. The link is going to go up in the chat box as well. Now, all net proceeds go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one alive and kicking. And if you want to find out more about violence against women in general, about what you can do about it, what you can do to help end it, go check out our website, www.thepixelproject.net. We have lots of resources, information, tips, and links that you can check out. All right, so the last thing is, does anyone have any announcements? I think PC and Sebastien have something to say. PC?
Kristen and I have the first in the new YA series. We're returning to a magical school, not the House of Night, not in the same world. It's Brand New Sense of Magic. It's called Draw Down the Moon, and it's out April 2nd.
All right, where can people get it?
Anywhere books are sold. It's already up to pre-order. The cover's awesome too. It's beautiful.
All right, Sebastien?
Yeah, Fate of the Argosy just came out. I think I just owe somebody a new USB key, which is the third in the Argosy trilogy, featuring Farius Parfax, a young woman learning the Argosy ways, which are always full of a lot of adventure. And then in December 7th, it looks like a surprise new Greatcoats novel is actually coming out that was never supposed to be seen yet, and yet is coming out this December, called Crucible of Chaos, featuring one of my favorite Greatcoats. So yeah, so I hope people will check that out.
Exciting news. And also available anywhere books are sold.
Available anywhere books are sold. And if they're not, then just, pick at the bookstore. That's what I say.
Can I just also add,
Alison?
yeah,
Yes,
I just want to add that the bundle that I'm offering, this is the American cover. You can see they've got little weapons in their hands there, which I think is so so nicely done. But because I live in Australia, I have not got to sign any of these in America for American readers. So the ones that will be signed will be probably the only ones that will be signed, because I don't get to America to sign them. So they will be very, very rare.
Rare and exclusive.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that.
All right, thank you, Alison. Thank you, PC, Alison, and Sebastien, for being with us today, and for the amazing panel. And thank you, everybody. And we'll say good night, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world, and goodbye.
Thank you, Anusha.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anusha.
Thank you, Anusha.